Добрый день, я приветствую всех на брифинге Министерства иностранных дел Российской Федерации. С нами российские и зарубежные корреспонденты. И начнем с графика министра иностранных дел России Сергея Викторовича Лаврова. Сегодня, 27 декабря, состоятся переговоры глав внешнеполитических ведомств России и Индии в Москве. Вот-вот они начнутся. Министры проведут сверку позиций по актуальным международным вопросам. Отдельно затронут тему взаимодействия в рамках ООН, ШОС, группа 20, обсудят приоритеты председательства России в БРИКС в наступающем году. Предполагается углубленный обмен мнениями по проблематике формирования справедливой архитектуры безопасности ВТР, ситуация вокруг Украины, Афганистан, а также Палестино-израильское противостояние. По итогам переговоров запланирована пресс-конференция, она пройдет в прямом эфире. Завтра, 28 декабря в 11:30, опять же в прямом эфире телеканала «Россия-24» состоится интервью министра иностранных дел России Сергея Викторовича Лаврова, генеральному директору международной медиагруппы «Россия сегодня» Дмитрию Константиновичу Киселеву по актуальным вопросам внешней политики и текущей международной повестки дня. И еще один анонс. Пока еще у меня нет точной даты, но учитывая, что многие задают этот вопрос относительно того, когда и в каком формате будет подведение итогов внешнеполитического года, скажу, что по традиции, и мы сохраняем эту традицию и в этот раз, большая пресс-конференция министра иностранных дел России Сергея Лаврова состоится в январе. О точной дате мы, безусловно, объявим дополнительно для возможности аккредитации. Итак, переходим к актуальной международной повестке. Ситуация вокруг Украины. Украинские неонацисты не прекращают варварских обстрелов жилых кварталов ряда российских регионов, причиняя ущерб и страдания мирным жителям. Широко применяется представленная западниками крупнокалиберная артиллерия, то есть реактивные системы залпового огня, а также ударные беспилотники. 20 декабря в результате ударов ВСУ по территории ДНР ранены 6 человек. 21 декабря бандеровскими наследниками были обстреляны Донецк и Горловка. Погиб один мирный житель, ранено 5, в том числе девочка-подросток 2007 года рождения. Одна из ракет попала в Донецкий областной травматологический центр. Помимо больницы нанесен ущерб транспортному депо, где полностью уничтожены 2 троллейбуса. Повреждены многоквартирные частные жилые дома, здания библиотеки 3-го корпуса Донецкого национального технического университета, другие объекты социальной и гражданской инфраструктуры. Ночью 22 декабря ВСУ нанесли безжалостный удар по школе и детскому саду в Калачанском районе Херсонской области. Тяжело ранен охранник, дети не пострадали, и не пострадали по счастливой случайности в связи с поздним временем суток, их просто не было в здании. В тот же день в Донецке в результате сброса боеприпасов с украинских беспилотников пострадали 5 сотрудников МЧС, они тушили пожар, а также сотрудник коммунального предприятия, причем боевики ВСУ были повторно они наносили удары повторно именно по пожарной бригаде. Украинские националисты открывали огонь по Белгородской области. 22 декабря они обстреляли из миномета окраины Шебекина. 23 декабря атаковали мост в Грайворонском районе с помощью дрона «Камикадзе». Пострадало 5 человек. Вечером 24 декабря массированным обстрелом подверглась Горловка. Погибла местная жительница, ранены 10 человек. Сгорел торговый центр «Галактика», повреждены школа, художественный музей. К сожалению, на Западе продолжают цинично закрывать глаза на эти преступления своих киевских подопечных. Либо просто
ignoring these crimes committed by their Kyiv's beneficiaries. As the West says, it has been successfully invested in the Zelensky regime. The Russian Federation courts are still passing the verdicts related to the Ukrainian neo-Nazis who committed serious crimes against civil population. The last week, 10 combatants of the nationalist regiment Azov, Kuzmenko, Kochuyevsky, Pechko, Mogilny, Sigis, Svitoy, Lagosha, Bezmenov, Dubrov, Potapov, were condemned to 25 years of imprisonment for the crimes committed against the civil population of Mariupol in 2022. Another 3 combatants were condemned to different types of imprisonment, from 24 years to life imprisonment for having committed crimes against the civil population in DPR in 2022. A Ukrainian neo-Nazi, Mr. Rashpla, who in 2022 in Mariupol executed by shooting 16 civilians, was condemned to 22 years of imprisonment. Another successor of Bandera, Mr. Poptsov, who in 2022 bombarded the residential quarters in the PDR, was condemned to 28 years of imprisonment in absentia. On the 25th of December, the Basmanny Court of Moscow, at the request of the Russian Investigative Committee, arrested head of the main Intelligence Department of the Defence Ministry of Ukraine, Mr. Budanov. He was charged with the preparation and the perpetration in Russia of 104 crimes stipulated in Article 205 of the Penal Code of the Russian Federation. In the context of a growing tiredness from Ukraine and the Ukrainian regime, and the reduction of finance and military support to the Zelensky regime by the West, the regime is ready to take any steps in order to bring the Ukrainian conflict issue back at the center of the international agenda. We remember the situation in Bucha. It was highly covered in the West, but everyone became silent when it came to the proofs. All the international community, or all the Western community, visited Bucha, including the representatives of the international organizations. The Western journalists dedicated almost every day to their articles to this issue. They prepared documentaries and different materials until we asked them to provide us with the lists of those who were killed. Where are these name lists which are created in any case of an accident, be it terrorist act or an aircraft crash? These lists are usually published by media on their websites with the names and with the precise data about the victims. Their relatives, their friends must be informed about what has happened. And these lists prove the fact of this accident that has taken place, but there are no such lists and there is no precise data about these victims. There have been no victims because this was an act of a provocation. And the situation is the same today. We do not exclude the possibility of another act of provocation with the use of Western poisonous substances in order to initiate another campaign on the accusations of our country of the usage of chemical weapon. Several years ago, the Western community tried to influence the international community related to the chemical weapon issue. The Ukrainian Security Service is actively participating in this campaign with the help of a Ukrainian-based company, Realab, which is specialized at the import of chemicals and precursors. In October-November, Germany, via this firm, bought a small portion of triethylenolamin and nitrogen-containing sodium compounds produced by the American corporation Honeywell Research Chemicals, based in Germany. So what are those substances? Triethanolamine is included in the addendum on chemicals of the Chemical Weapons Convention, and it must be declared annually. This compound is a precursor for the synthesis of poisonous chemicals of blistering effect, meaning nitrogen epirite. Nitrogen-containing compounds of sodium are highly toxic, and the effect of this compound is similar to that of a cyanide. According to the Russian specialists, the Ukrainian Security Service wants to organize a provocation action in the zone of actions of our troops. The epirite is known since the First World War, and Germans called it Gift der Gifte, poison of all poisons. It wasn't used during the Second World War because it was prohibited by the conventions, which were recognized even by Hitler. But the Ukrainian neo-Nazis are ready to go further than their fascist idols. The Zelensky regime is indifferent to the consequences of the usage of munitions with depleted uranium. They will not take into consideration the interests of their soldiers, people who serve the interests of Ukraine, people who are ready to be placed under the arms. Zelensky and his junta are indifferent to the consequences that the population of Ukraine will face if this act of provocation is implemented. The most important thing for Zelensky is his survival. However, the world is aware of the true essence of this initiative in the creation of the anti-Russian platform. The number of those who are ready to fight for this rotten, highly corrupted government based on nepotism is getting smaller and smaller. For the past year, the military commissioners managed to place under arms about 40,000 people, which does not allow them yet to compensate on the losses of Ukrainian soldiers during the counter-offensive. The Ukrainian population is being turned into rightless bone slaves. People who reached the age of mobilization will be chased. And the regime of Zelensky is planning to force people of the age of mobilization to come back to Ukraine. And this offer was already welcomed in so-called democratic Europe. The Minister of Interior of Estonia told that Tallinn will help Kyiv hand over avoiders. But Estonia will not pay for those who stay in Estonia because it needs money to provide for them, to provide shelter for them. All that is associated to our culture, to our country, is being destroyed. But the creation of normal living conditions for those who came to Estonia is not in the interest of Estonia itself. It didn't sign up to these projects, to this idea of handing over the Ukrainian citizens to the regime of Zelensky. They will be happy to do it in order not to pay for them. Poland and other countries are discussing this initiative. The population of Ukraine is just a token money for Ukraine, for the Zelensky regime. On the 19th of December, the press conference of Zelensky took place. It showed the absence of confidence of Kyiv in the future, in its own future, in the context of the tiredness of the West from Ukraine. We see that Washington, Brussels, London are getting tired of the beggary of the Ukrainian beneficiaries, and the Western community is not willing to provide for the corrupted regime using the money from its own pockets. And the sooner the goals of the special military operation are accomplished, the sooner the peace will come, and the collective West must realize that. As we all know, Ukraine will celebrate the Christmas this year not on the 7th of January but on the 25th of December in order to be closer to Europe. However, in fact, people who believe in God celebrate religious holidays in order to be closer to God, and only in Ukraine they celebrate Christmas in order to be closer to Europe. Separatists from the Orthodox Church of Ukraine tried to organize festive services in cathedrals who used to be part of canonical Ukrainian Orthodox Church, and they placed a lot of hopes that the center of all holidays would become Kyiv, Pechersk, Lavra. However, the Assumption Cathedral, once full of believers, was almost empty according to the media. And the similar situation was in other cathedrals and monasteries in Ukraine, because people are tired from the endless lies of the Kyiv's regime, of permanent stealings and sacrificing the interests of the population in the name of another portion of money from the West. Well, Zelensky killed Ukraine. That is why praiseful declarations made by Zelensky that Ukraine, for the first time in its history, celebrated Christmas with Europe, face a lot of criticism. Well, historically, this holiday was celebrated on the 25th of December only in the times of Nazis. I know that this seems unbelievable, but this was the case in the period from between 1941 and 1944, when Ukraine was occupied by Hitlerites. And the same situation is being witnessed today in the times of the Bandera successors, but the ordinary population didn't let the regime to use them. And this has nothing to do with the regime.
And I think this showed them where the truth lies and where the lies are. But this is not enough for the Kyiv regime. Ukrainians and the children are being deprived of the main symbol of the new year, and now Santa Claus has been declared as the enemy. He's being presented as a relic of the Soviet past or as the Kremlin agent. Young Ukrainians and their parents are persistently imposed the European version of this character. And I won't even comment on that. But we can't not comment on it and not pay attention to it, because this is the ideology that goes against their own history, against their own traditions. It's being paid for by the West. And on the threshold of 2024, we would like to wish the Ukrainians to get rid of the neo-Nazis in Kyiv, who are turning the country into a scorched field just to please the Western masters, and they're depriving people of historical memory and hope for a better future. And despite the bloodshed and the heresies that is being spread by the Zelensky regime, let nothing prevent them from celebrating the coming New Year and Christmas. I would like to repeat once again that numerous examples appearing in mass media how people have not succumbed in Ukraine to this political manipulation, trying to rewrite their own religious traditions, says a lot. Speaking of technologies, we see the same efforts of the West to rewrite history and form a new identity, with the example in Serbia, a week after the extraordinary elections to the parliament of Serbia, an attempt to Mendonize the street protest in Belgrade was made under the pretext of alleged falsifications. The well-known templates from Western methodologies were used, which have already been used in a number of countries, which led to tragic results. The role of instigators, according to a well-tried practice, was played by activists, which was mobilized by various structures, which is no secret, financed and managed from the outside. The provocations that lasted for several days began on December 24th, when a crowd of protesters consisting of about 2,000 people decided to storm the capital's mayor's office. Those are the people presenting a democratic front, supposedly. The police behaved with maximum restraint, persistently urged the protesters to disperse, and did everything to prevent a tragedy. And only when the building suffered significant material damage, the law enforcement units were forced to intervene and start detentions. Dozens of police officers were injured as a result of the illegal actions, and some of them are in grave condition. It is clear that those who initiated this and were involved in this shameful attack are bent on destabilizing the situation. And this has nothing to do with the elections. We've already seen it before from our own experience. These figures are committing violence against Serbia itself, against Serbian people, against members of the Ministry of Internal Affairs, other state bodies that are carrying out their duty to protect the citizens. They cynically hide under the pretext of the struggle for justice, once again mention human rights, but their behavior shows their true attitude to the declared values. The majority opinion found expression in the elections of December the 17th, and Serbs convincingly confirmed their support for the current leadership of the country, President Vučić, and there were no irregularities that could dramatically affect the outcome of the election were found, including the Russian observers. The desire to revise the voting results by force and by fomenting anarchy has nothing to do with democracy. I would also like to mention a few words about what the OSCE is doing, because it's up to them to take concrete steps to defend the democracy inside Serbia, to make a statement towards those Western powers and structures who are trying to destabilize the situation in the country, to call for compliance with the laws. But instead of that, what do we see? We see a document by North Macedonia, Poland, Malta, and Finland about the security issues in the OSCE regions. And the authors of the documents, who are currently chairmanship in office, and even future CIOs, Poland, Malta, and Finland, drafted that document. And we have yet another non-consensual statement, which is broadcasting in an exaggerated form the political approaches of the collective West, primarily to what is happening in Ukraine. And there are no attempts to analyze the current deep crisis in the organization and propose ways out of it. The text is blatantly anti-Russian, contains a full set of well-known Russophobic cliches, and the authors apparently sought to smooth out the impression of the OSCE Ministerial Council meeting held in Skopje in November this year, which was attended by the Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Russian Federation, Sergei Lavrov, against the wishes of the radicals. As you know, there was a fully dramatic situation where, under the Washington's pressure, many Western representatives came up with staged photos ahead of the meeting that apparently Russia is not present. And the next day, during the actual opening, where Minister Lavrov was present, there was a march by several countries who spoke out that they're deliberately not going to attend that event. So that attempt to blow up the meeting was unsuccessful, because we have been telling how the event was taking place, and it was just an attempt to stage this event, and the West fell victim to their own PR moves. And then they decided to smooth out the impression and put out that statement of the former, current, and future CIOs. And unfortunately, the Maltese chairmanship, which will take office on the 1st of January, did not bother to outline its plan to restore the full-scale work of the organization in this review, which is in full crisis mode. And we're waiting from the Valletta not the thoughtless promotion of biased Western attitudes, but an assessment of the real situation and concrete steps to resume constructive dialogue, without which it will simply be impossible to preserve the OSCE. In a few words on the sanctions, everyone mentions illegal sanctions, but I think it's time we talk closer to reality about a trade war, trade aggression of the West, of the collective West, against their competitors, against Russia, against China. Let me show you an example, and you will see that the sanctions are not the name for what is going on. It's a means of carrying out the tasks, and the tasks have been formulated in the context of a real trade war that has basically been proclaimed by the collective West as their another task. As part of the 12th package of restrictions adopted by the EU Council on December 18th, a ban was imposed on imports of Russian aluminum wire, foil, and some types of aluminum pipes. The decision was a direct result of lobbying on the part of a number of major Western aluminum producers, who did not hesitate to address the leadership of the European Commission with a corresponding open letter. In the letter, they supported the restrictive measures against Russian aluminum, insisting at the same time that such measures would not harm the European Union industry. And they said that the Russian share could be easily replaced by internal European Union production as well as imports from other countries, thus ensuring a more reliable and sustainable supply of products for the benefit of European consumers. And the key word here is imports, because among the companies who signed the appeal to the European Union, a good half of them are Anglo-Saxons. American Alcoa and Novelis, British Australian Rio Tinto, British Alvance, and they don't even hide the fact that they will not stop there, but they intend to continue lobbying the introduction of further sanctions against the Russian aluminum industry. And of course, not a situation in Ukraine or any state of humanitarian affairs are not their concern. They only care about the profit and a chance to use legal measures and get ahead of their competitors. We are, of course, witnessing the merging of unscrupulous politics with unscrupulous business. Anti-Russian restrictions are once again being used for unfair competition, and once again with a clear bias towards self-serving of American political and economic interests. And speaking of European consumers, who are not even mentioned in the sanctions, they're only made against us. And they don't mention how a typical consumer of the European Union will live. And then politically, these sanctions get a lot of words of support from the population. And here is where things get interesting. In November of this year, the European Federation of Aluminum Consumers, which unites mainly medium and small enterprises, appealed to the European Commission and the EU Council. The reason for the appeal was the above-mentioned active lobbying efforts of large aluminum corporations, of those monopolists. And according to consumers, the introduction of sanctions against Russian aluminum, even if they were limited, will inevitably lead to higher prices, put at risk the closure of hundreds of companies in the European Union member states, and negatively affect the industrial potential of the European Union and the implementation of measures to green the economy in Russia, which produces aluminium. And it is pointed out in the appeal that aluminium meets the highest environmental standards, will not suffer any serious losses by redirecting the supplies to other markets. So what does that tell us? That representatives of a real economy sector, of the medium and small enterprises, who are not monopolists, and who are not dealing with major profits, that have to deal with the EU member states, and not lobbyists from across the ocean, are basically screaming that the anti-Russian sanctions will bury the area which has to deal with the imports of those products. And as further developments have shown, Brussels once again did not want to hear the arguments of reason, not for the first time and probably not for the last. And there are no signs that the EU top brass, even on the threshold of the forthcoming elections to the European Parliament next year, and the change of leadership in the European Council and the European Commission, will begin to think realistically about the consequence of not only anti-Russian but also anti-European sanctions policy. Whose interests are carried out by Brussels? First of all, against their own population, against the citizens of the European Union, and then trying to serve the interests of the monopolists whose companies or interests directly deal with Washington and London. And it isn't the first time. Just take a look at what is happening and what has been happening with the vaccine, which Brussels officials were buying presumably for their own citizens, but were actually purchased only because they were supplying the financial interests of Washington and of London, of course, but first and foremost of Washington. The exact same thing happened here, and neither the civil society or any activists or the citizens received an answer why representatives of the European Commission and Brussels, why they purchased the vaccine from the America in such high volumes for such high prices, where it was used later on, what was the quality of the purchased medicine, what were the consequences of its usage. Everything was blocked. The answers to those questions will never be heard by the European consumers. And I would just like to provide a concrete example of what I'm talking about. The European Union actions in fighting coronavirus continue raising questions in Europe. First of all, the European Commission signed contracts in order to supply vaccines by the Western suppliers, and with a company that during its existence did not issue a single medicine. We're speaking of Moderna, and the deals happened before the approval of the medicines by the pharmaceutical regulators of the European Union, so way before they were permitted to use. They spent astronomical amount of money, which means from the pockets of a regular taxpayer We're talking about billions, perhaps dozens of billions, or maybe hundreds of billions. They bought so many medicals that it far surpassed the population of the European Union. We're talking about more than 4 billion doses from 8 different producers. Can you imagine? And the most surprising is that Brussels in the European continent became the main advocate for clean operations and the combater of corruption, but they're keeping every detail in secret and only revealing those to a close circle of selected few. But according to the details in mass media, we understood that the conditions are horrible, and it was only possible due to the shrinking number of import. And for the efforts from Hungary and Poland, Pfizer sued them. And the contracts in the European Commission were drafted in such a way that even with a high demand, the European countries will receive vaccines until 2027. The illness is different, but the vaccine is the same. And with the European Commission head lead to a few legal cases, including the European Union Court. Not a single one has been finished. And in Romania, for too much vaccines in the country, the Minister of Health is being accused of financial damage to the budget of the states. So what do we find out now? It is stunning that vaccines are not in demand and have to be destroyed. Before the end of this year in Italy, they have to get rid of about 15 million doses. So the taxpayers' money are being thrown away just like that. And they could provide those vaccines to the countries that really needed them. They really asked for that, but the European Union decided to first provide themselves with vaccines. Then they can share with others, or they're free not to share them with others. And we're witnessing the same situation with the agricultural production. It's exactly the same. Trying to care about the business. Brussels forgot about the needs of their own citizens. They're witnessing a shortage of medicals, and even European Commission is trying to admit that. And this problem has acquired a chronicle nature. And according to the estimations in Belgium and Italy, they estimated 3,000 positions that were missing. And last year, during the flu season, France was missing basic medicals, such as paracetamol, a lot of antibiotics, and about 280 items of medicals were missing. And in Ireland, 212. And they were mocking our country. They were using any opportunity to try and shake the situation in our country. Meanwhile, considering medicals and vaccines. And the European officials are explaining it with the disrupted chain of command, disrupted chain of import. But that's shameful. You were the ones who, in European Commission, in your cabinets in Brussels, adopting sanction measures in order to destroy the world logistics, starting from transport, connection in the European continent, and up until the inability to make payments, not to mention the endless sanctions against the companies and people who try to somehow restore on the European continent this chain of exports. And then you call that the reason for the lack among the citizens of the European countries of medicaments.
In fact, we see the practice of abandoning the producing by pharmaceutical giants of medicines that are not profitable. So these medicines are just thrown away, and a logical question appears. So in whose interests are acting the heads of the European Union? Well, this is obvious, the interests of Anglo-Saxon duet. We are sure that ordinary Europeans will evaluate the acts of these European Union top officials, headed by Ursula von der Leyen. Well, I will come up with another version. I do not insist on that. So why dozens of millions of these vaccines are being destroyed now? However, they paid for them billions of dollars. Well, first of all, a lot of studies tell us that these vaccines are not of a good quality. They harm our health and they cause an irreparable damage. They do not preserve our health, neither do they help people overcome or prevent any diseases. The second thing, well, it will be impossible to count, to say if those medicines were really bought, because all the documents will be destroyed eventually, and to verify whether these dozens of billions of dollars were spent on these vaccines or just spent on something else, well, it will be impossible to prove that. This is not just the corruption. This is a world corruption. This is a total destruction by the collective West, by the Western world, of all those principles, traditions, and values that have been promoted by them as civilizational values. So we are moving on, and if we started to speak about sanctions, I would like to say that on the 26th of December, the Republic of Korea have added 682 items of the list of export control goods and technologies that will be prohibited from supplying to Russia. This will be another package of sanctions in 2024, which is related to the special military operation. This step was taken under command of Washington, and this provokes not only a regret by the intention of South Korea to harm practical cooperation with Russia, and this damages the economy and the industry of South Korea itself. These restrictions will damage a practical cooperation between Russia and South Korea, and basically it has already been damaged when South Korea joined the sanctions imposed by the collective West, and this will have a negative impact on the entire set of bilateral ties. And we reserve the right to come up with retaliation sanctions and not necessarily symmetrical ones. I would like to mention a couple of words about the program of a voluntary relocation to the Russian Federation of our compatriots. Since the launch of this program in 2007, more than 1.16 million people used this program. And this state program is a vibrant changing mechanism, and the Russian Ministry of Interior is the main coordinator and executor of this program, together with specialized ministries, including the Foreign Ministry. According to the decree of the Russian president on modifying several acts of the president of the Russian Federation of the 22nd of November 2023, this state program prescribes the Institute of Repatriation, which will come into force in 2024. The term of repatriate includes not only Russian people who lived abroad as of the 24th of February 2022, but also those who withdrew from the Russian Federation citizenship, who were born or lived permanently on the territory of the RSFSR, or who were citizens of the former USSR. This category of repatriates have different benefits, measures of social protection depending on the mechanism of the participation in this state program, either on common basis or basing on some special features. For example, the relocation to another subject of the Federation, which is not subject to the state program. They will be exempted from custom duties on personal belongings or the compensation of expenditures related to the visa or the obtaining a special legal status. They are also exempted from the confirmation of their level of the Russian language. Russian diplomatic missions and the Russian Foreign Ministry will raise awareness among the compatriots abroad. You can use our internet resources, social media, together with our colleagues from the Ministry of Interior. We regularly organize workshops, webinars, and teleconferences for our compatriots. We present our regional programs of relocation. For instance, our regular annual roundtable in November on the basis of the Consulate General in Bonn. This helps us eliminate the vulnerabilities of the state program. Despite the fact that non-friendly countries introduced a set of restrictive measures against Russia and our compatriots, we raise awareness among our compatriots regarding this issue. This program is interesting not only for the near abroad, but also for non-friendly countries of the West. For the past 9 months, more than 700 people were relocated in line with this program. And the policy of these countries damages the situation of the Russian diaspora and Russian-speaking citizens, but they use this program. However, the relocation is being complicated by transport and logistical problems and restrictions related to the money transfer. However, this does not stop these people. Speaking about the history, 25 years ago, on the 17th of December, 1998, a military operation Desert Fox was launched. This wasn't an operation authorized by the UN. This was an attack of the USA and the Great Britain against Iraq. The formal reason was the alleged refusal of Baghdad to cooperate with the Special Commission experts. Richard Butler, the head of this commission, gave a fully distorted image of the situation with different baseless facts about the total absence of the cooperation with Iraq. So this document became the reason for this military action. According to a lot of experts, the true reason was an internal political crisis within the US. Well, I will remind you that back then the White House tried to distract the attention of the broad American public from the hearings on a scandalous affair of Monica Lewinsky in the U.S. Congress. As they say, this was a blitzkrieg, a fast, victorious war. British and American aviation carried out 650 assault flights for 73 hours. They dropped more than 600 bombs and launched more than 100 cruise missiles. Dozens of civilians were killed, more than 100 were injured. One of the outcomes of this operation was the dissolution of this UN Special Commission, which was compromised. In January 1999, we found proofs that this commission was used by the US intelligence services in order to hack the security system of Iraq and to track the movements of Mr. Hussein. And it was said that the CIA engineers who worked as technical specialists of the UN installed equipment to spy on different Iraqi objects. This commission was replaced later by the UN Monitoring, Verification and Inspection Commission. However, its work did not prevent a military invasion by the USA into Iraq under the pretext of the necessity to eliminate a notorious weapon of mass destruction. However, later, the American government had to admit that this was a staged operation. The desert fox showed the whole world the true essence of the US politics, the willingness to accomplish its tasks in foreign and internal policy by all means, including by the aggression against sovereign states in violation of international rights. On the 1st of January, Cuba will celebrate 65 years of the victory in the Cuban Revolution. This day became the day of independence, of liberation of Cuba. The Cuban people, better than anyone, knows the difficulties related to this journey to the true sovereignty, to preservance preservance and protection its nation in the context of unprecedented pressure from the USA. For the past few years, this island of freedom became a democratic state with constitutional rights, with different breakthroughs in the fields of medicine, public health, education, culture, tourism, and other fields. Cuba is well respected by the international community, and many peoples thank Havana for the help in fight against colonialism. Cuba has been coherently, consistently advocated for the respect of internationally recognized principles and norms of international law and the central role of the UN in the global system. Despite the blockade, it helped everyone. We are glad that despite thousands of kilometers that separate us, we are linked by the ties of friendship, strategic partnership. We develop constructive cooperation in different fields in the interest of our both peoples, in the interest of international peace and security, and our solidarity. And recently, we became even closer to this island of freedom because our air company Russia launched on the 24th of December direct flights from Moscow to Havana. The Russian Federation stands in favor of the full and unconditional end of this illegitimate and anti-human economic, trade and financial blockade of Cuba, which is an instrument of political blackmail of Washington. We will fight with Cuba against this embargo, which is a shameful relic of the past. This will help us normalize the relationships, create a multipolar, just world order based on the principles of equality, mutual respect, and the respect of international law. I take this occasion, and on behalf of our ministry, I wish this beautiful country, our friendly country, well-being and prosperity. Another important announce: in 2024, Russia will take over presidency within the CIS. President Putin improved the concept of presidency with the Russian priorities. First, we are planning to pay special attention to the economic integration, the cooperation in the field of industry and energy, security, industrial cooperation, transport, logistical, connectivity, ecology, innovations, digitalizations. We will make a focus on the resisting on the resistance to illegitimate Western sanctions and to a broader use of national currencies and mutual settlements. We will try to harmonize the decisions on national and Eurasian levels in order to preserve the stability of these regional integration alliances in the new context. We will pay special attention to the deepening of our cultural and humanitarian ties, cooperation in the field of public health, science, education, sports. We will fight against the falsification of history and glorification of Nazism. We will contribute to the promotion and support of our language. And as for the military and law enforcement fields, we will contribute to the elimination of new emergent security threats and challenges. We will consolidate the external borders of the Commonwealth. We will cooperate with the Commonwealth members within the international organizations. During the CIS summit in Bishkek, we created a necessary legal basis to arrange our work on another level. We will deepen our contacts with the Eurasian Economic Council, with the CSTO and SCO in the field of security. In the upcoming days, the text of the concept will be published on our official internet resources. The presentation of our priorities will take place in the headquarters of the CIS in Minsk on the 23rd of January 2024. It will be attended by Mr. Pankin, Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs. And the Ministry of Foreign Affairs has a separate Telegram channel dedicated to the presidency of Russia within the CIS, which is called Briefly About the CIS. And we will publish relevant information about different events within the organization there. I would like to move to questions. So, is Международная жизнь here? Good afternoon, Ms. Zakharova. Yesterday on our website, an article was published dedicated to the development of Ukrainian Nazism. In the beginning of January, Ukraine will celebrate the birthday of Bandera. Well, after the invasion of Nazi, Ukraine was almost destroyed, but now it turned to a Nazi state itself. How could you comment on this? Well, you know, this process didn't start 1 or 5 years ago. We have been witnessing this for decades. Well, you brought up a very relevant issue, and as you know, as you mentioned, as we know, there was a conference attended by highly respected researchers from different countries of Europe, and they didn't hesitate to talk openly about the Nazism in Ukraine, about the involvement of Western structures in this process. This process has been handmade. In the beginning, this process was launched by the Austria and Hungary and Germany. Then it was an instrument of the Nazi Germany. Hundreds of Belarusian villages were burned down. These are not just wooden houses. These are real people. Then the Ukrainian population was massacred. And you know, now they are
They destroyed Jews in large numbers, and even the word destruction of people in large numbers is already a blasphemy. And in modern Ukraine, everyone who took place in it were proclaimed heroes. In Canada, they're applauded, and everyone else is staying silent. and except for anti-fascist organizations in our country and CIS countries who are often advocating for that. And after the war, many militants and activists of the Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists, OUN, took refuge from retribution in the United States and Canada. And after the collapse of the USSR, the ruling elites of Western countries facilitated the return of Nazism to Ukraine when they saw that no one else would protect Ukraine from this illness. And they facilitated the return of Nazism to Ukraine, ensured its introduction into the educational sphere in order to educate Ukrainians to hate Russia, to make Ukraine an anti-Russia. And so modern Ukrainian Nazism is a direct successor of the ideology of Hitler's collaborators of World War II, the executioners of Waldin and Hatton. They're not even hiding that fact. They were proclaiming heroes, the people who were actively executing those politics, not just the followers, not successors, or their adapters from other historical eras, but the very same ones who were actively involved, not philosophically in Nazism, but in practical Nazism. In the context of the 10th anniversary of Euromaidan, it is appropriate to recall that specially trained groups of Ukrainian neo-Nazis were the street army of the coup d'etat organized by Western countries in February 2014. The very same power. And the regime that came to power, or regimes, because it was a range of different groups that we're now referring to as the Kyiv regime, but before that was different politicians incorporated from the West, citizens of the United States, of Canada, of European Union states. So the anti-institutional coup d'etat that led the politicians to power, they adopted the cult of the heroes of the OUN-UPA. And for many years we have been drawing the attention of the international community to the growth of this evil in Ukraine, and not only in Ukraine. Before that it happened in Baltic states, and now it's happening all over Europe. We prepare materials on the crime of Ukrainian Nazism, the Nazi god of the Kyiv regime's policy towards Russian, Hungarians, other indigenous peoples and national minorities of Ukraine, the repression of Ukrainian Orthodox Church. And we spread these materials on international platforms. We pass them on to our foreign colleagues. And yes, indeed, Ukraine today is the center of the world Nazism, and this problem goes far beyond the Eastern European region. A lot of people have understood that. Others, a lot of them do not want to come to face with it, just as the militarization and Nazification of Germany after Hitler came to power, and it did not frighten the Western powers back in the day. Many applauded them. In order for truth to reach broad public circles, we have to coordinate the efforts of all healthy anti-fascist and anti-Nazi forces. And scientists have a significant role here. Historians. And the conference you mentioned, a proposal was put forward to create international scientific structure in order to study Nazism and its modern forms. And it not only deserves attention, but support on the state level, on the public level, of the civil society, and from every citizen of the country. Will continue to do everything that we can to combat this evil. Thank you very much. And in order to continue this theme, recently, British Foreign Ministry David Cameron said that the UK government expects to at least maintain its support for Ukraine next year at the level of this year, perhaps even make it bigger. How would you comment on this statement? It's madness. It's detached from reality. It's sponsoring of a political project. It's an act of Russophobia. And it's directed against the constituents of their own country because it undermines national long-standing interests of Britain itself. People are being turned one against another. They're being diluted, and this is being done by the British politicians. Is Newsru with us today? Yes, hello, Madam Zakharova. Mikhail Rosen and Newsru, on behalf of our agency, I would like to congratulate you and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs on the upcoming new year. We wish you all the success and great health, so you could speak more for our country. Thank you very much. Same goes for you. And now for our question. Are there any concerns in Moscow about Armenia's chairmanship of the European Agency of the European Union in 2024 against the backdrop of tense relations with Russia? Although Prime Minister Pashinyan has stated that the EAU is an economic association that should not have a political agenda. But at the same time, there are very current Iran's outbursts against Moscow. Russia's interaction with the Armenian side within the framework of the Eurasian Economic Union is built on a pragmatic and mutually beneficial basis. As you see from year to year, we observe high growth rates of Armenia's economic indicators. We see that Yerevan receives significant dividends from its participation in the Union, and despite some ambiguous statements that you have just mentioned by the representatives of the Republic. Together, we are Armenian partners, as well as with the rest of the member states. We're building a constructive and depoliticized dialogue. From January the 1st of the upcoming year, the presidency of the EAU bodies will be taken over by Armenia, and the Prime Minister, speaking at the meeting of the Supreme Eurasian Economic Council on December 25th in St. Petersburg, stated Yerevan's focus on the systematic fulfillment of tasks in the medium and long term, and we undoubtedly support our partners' commitment to further fruitful work aimed at strengthening and developing the Eurasian economic integration. Thank you. And I have another question towards Beijing's action. Information is emerging that China is going to use PMCs more actively to promote its interests in Africa. What is Moscow's attitude to this? Is there no fear that the continent will completely turn into a field of confrontation between illegal armed groups that will be acting in the interests of foreign powers? Does this mean a new colonization of Africa without any commitment to the interests of local population? First of all, let me remind you that the People's Republic of China has the sovereign right to develop relations with any state in the world, including those located on the African continent, in the volumes and forms that meet the interests of the interacting parties. Secondly, in contrast to the neocolonial practices of the West, China-Africa cooperation is built on a voluntary, equal, mutually respectful, and mutually beneficial basis. And thirdly, both Russia and China are among the largest international donors, providing effective and selfless assistance to the poorest and developing countries in Africa. And most importantly, we have to look at the result. Because if we look at the result of these formations in the military organizations who over the decades were on the territory of the African countries, who were perpetrating whatever they wanted, and African countries themselves proclaimed repeatedly the ineffectiveness of their presence there towards Russian instructors, or perhaps towards the efforts of Chinese partners. I have never heard such proclamations. As for our countries, we only heard thank you for the support and assistance that Russian instructors provided to the countries that invited them. Thank you for their assistance and all that, while taking into consideration that over the decades that was the zone of responsibility of Western organizers, and whatever they did contributed in no way to the security. Thank you very much. Is RIA Novosti with us today? Good morning, Madam Zakharova. In the Albanian language segment of the internet, a document has been made public that is presented as a draft chart of the community of Serb municipalities of Kosovo, the same one that was handed over to Belgrade and Pristina by representatives of the EU and the United States 2 months ago. How can you comment on it? We have familiarized ourselves with the publication. If the text is indeed authentic, then the state of affairs with Western mediation in the Kosovo settlement is quite deplorable. We see the absolute impotence of the United States and the European Union, who are unable to solve the problem on its merits and are firmly forcing Serbia to a knowingly unacceptable outcome at the cost of abandoning its fundamental national interests. The above-mentioned so-called draft purely nominally echoes the basic Brussels agreements signed by the European Union between Belgrade and Pristina in 2013 and 2015, crossing out the principles laid out in them, without which the security and well-being of Kosovo Serbs are unattainable. The document contains mutually exclusive references to UN Security Council Resolution 1244 and the so-called Constitution in quotation marks of Kosovo, and prescribes respect for the independence of the self-proclaimed republic. You know, either the UN Security Council Resolution 1244, which is obligatory for everyone, or the Constitution of Kosovo and the independence of the self-proclaimed republic. I will point out one again. Those things are mutually exclusive. The community of Serbian municipalities is proposed to be built into Kosovo-Albanian system of power, to be subordinated to a flawed local so-called legislation, which is deprived of weighty executive powers. The Pristina leadership will have the right to block any decision of the community, which makes it non-functional and simply meaningless. And in addition, its property rights, financial autonomy are sharply limited, and the use of official symbols is only allowed in conjunction with Kosovo quasi-state designation. I would like to remind you that on May 2nd of this year, in accordance with agreements that have been reached under the guarantees of the European Union, this steering group of Kosovo Serb experts submitted a draft statute of the community of Serb municipalities in Kosovo with reliable guarantees for the protection of Serbs. However, Pristina instantly rejected it. In Brussels, they merely waved their hands in response, shrugged their shoulders, and now they have drawn up their own version. Once again, the European Union has defiantly violated its own commitments. And such improvisations by the West on the subject of the Kosovo issues, and this is far from being the first, alienate, compromise, and undermine the situation in the region. There is no viable alternative to the current international legal framework for a settlement, first and foremost UN Security Council Resolution 1244. If this is all, is Russia today with us? First of all, we'd like to wish you a happy new year and happy holidays. Russia has clearly and specifically supported Serbia in the context of current events, the contestation of the election results, by that part of the opposition that has the open support of Western countries. In this context, how does Moscow assess the West's messages to Serbia that the period of balancing should end, or that Serbia should make a choice in favor of the West and against Russia? And secondly, what are the Western countries ready to do to achieve these goals? So how can or should Serbia react to this? Thank you very much. I think the period of balancing of the West should end. The period of balancing based on the equilibrium with the standards. If Serbia is a sovereign state recognized as such by the West, then the West should respect the decision of Serbia as a state and of Serbs as a people. And I mean Serbian population, not as a nationality, but all the Serbs and all the representatives of every nationality, Serbian citizens. If the West does not respect Serbia as a sovereign state and does not respect Serbs and Serbian citizens as a people, then the West should renounce the fact that democracy and liberty for them are something unwavering. Either democracy and the will of people in the context of current laws has full, legitimate basis and should be respected as a decision of the country by all the foreign players. Or what kind of democracy are we talking about according to the West? So it's not Serbia who's balancing. It's the West, and it's a dangerous kind of balancing. And where we see acute phases of conflicts or anti-constitutionals, coup d'etats, we see that it's the reason of the West's failure, which failed to keep that balance. And it's not a balance, it's a manipulation. It's staging of respect for sovereignty of the states. These are manipulations. And what did the West start with in the context of relations towards modern Serbia? We're looking at the last decade. First of all, Western countries, Washington, the European Union told Serbia, either with the West or with Russia. Bad phrasing, illegal, unjust, not taking into account the sovereignty of Serbia as a state. But then things got even worse. After that, Washington and Brussels told Serbia the following: only the West, no Russia at all. And they went beyond that still. The next demand for the Serbia was formulated by the West as following: only the West against Russia. And what comes next, I can tell you. I know how they will phrase the next demand of the West for the Belgrade. Only the West against Serbia. After that, they will not be content with the realization of national interests of Serbian citizens. They will only be content with pursuing interests of Washington and Brussels in the Serbian territory. That's the problem. They not only are pursuing a legal anti-democratic course against Serbia, the issue is that they're deepening their illegal attitude towards Serbia and broadening the number of demands of a legal nature towards Belgrade. And the worst is all of that against the backdrop of not fulfilling their own commitments and promises made to Belgrade. Do you see what I'm talking about? They promised so much: economic assistance, financial assistance, investments, special attitude, and they did not fulfill any of that. They're only changing the level of their legal demands. And could you imagine what would happen if Serbia and their leadership succumbed to this demand and accepted either partially or fully anti-Russian sanctions? Serbia would be held hostage by the West, and not just hostage, they would be their slaves. They would cut off completely their ties with Russia. They would deprive themselves of financial assistance. And not only financial assistance, but a financial gain that they get through stable import of Russian energetic resources. They would have deprived themselves of all of that, and they would not get assistance and help from the West, but only new demands. This is what has to be understood right now. I know there are a lot of young people in Serbia who don't feel the pain for the country because of the NATO bombardments of Belgrade. They were born in a different time. For them, that's history books. But they still have to understand that right now, they're already being lied to. They're being led astray by promises that aren't being fulfilled. And demands to Belgrade and Serbia are instantly turning them, if they fulfill those promises, into Western slaves.
Thank you very much. Thank you. So, is Anadolu with us? Good afternoon, Ms. Zakharova. we have two questions. The first one, the international community urges everybody to a truce and to solving the catastrophic humanitarian situation in the Gaza Strip. According to the Palestinian Party, more than 20,000 Palestinians are dead because of the Israelis' bombardments. And Mr. Netanyahu talked about the deepening, the reinforcement of hostilities in the Gaza Strip. What could you say about this? And the second question is about another shipments of armaments in Israel by the USA. Can we say that the USA is accomplice of the crimes committed by Israel? Well, unfortunately, we understand that the escalation of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict still continues, and the civilian infrastructure is being damaged, people are dying. Our country stands coherently for the immediate ceasefire. On the 12th of December, we voted in favor of the UN General Assembly resolution, and we proposed to include a similar formulation in the UN Security Council resolutions 2712, 2720. However, this was prevented by the obstructionist position of the USA. We try to alleviate the sufferings of the Gaza Strip population. We shipped about 390 tons of humanitarian cargoes through Egypt. This is our permanent position based on our personal experience. We condemn terrorist acts and we consider unacceptable a non-discriminate use of force in violation of international humanitarian law and collective punishment of civilians. As for your second question, if you allow me, please remind me the question. Yes, sure. It was about the USA and Israel and arms supplies. Well, you know how the military machine of the USA works. They ship a lot of weapons in the crisis zones in the Middle East. This leads to the destabilization and the building up of the conflictual potential in different regions of the world. They ignore the thesis that the crises in the Middle East do not have this option of forceful settlement. We must focus all our efforts on the immediate ceasefire, and we must settle the conflict basing on the Security Council, General Assembly resolutions, and this position has been promoted by us within all the international fora. All that we are witnessing today proves a deep militarization of the foreign policy by the USA and their allies. They step up their military presence in the East Mediterranean and in the Red Sea. This aggravates the risks of turning the Palestinian-Israeli conflict to the whole regional conflict. And unfortunately, there are no conclusions that are made as a result of this military activities of Washington and its satellites in Iraq, Libya, Afghanistan, and Syria. Thank you very much. Thank you. So, is Moscow Post here? Yes, good afternoon. In the beginning, I would like to congratulate you, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, the journalists, and the whole country on the upcoming holidays, the New Year. Thank you. Thank you very much. We have two questions. The first one. The Iranian partners, Novatek, the Chinese partners, Novatek, suspended their participation in the project Arctic LNG-2. How could you comment on this? Well, our energy cooperation with China is one of our most important fields of strategic cooperation. We are implementing a lot of joint projects, including the production of the LNG on Yamal LNG and Arctic LNG too. A number of Western countries are trying to prevent our energy partnership with China by imposing legitimate unilateral restrictions. We consider it to be unacceptable, in particular towards such large civilian projects as Arctic LNG 2 that are civilian infrastructure projects and that influence the energy balance of many countries. Well, our strategic cooperation with China in the field of energy will be gradually developed and will be consolidated. The situation around the Arctic LNG 2 proves once again the destructive role of Washington for the global energy security architecture. Washington speaks a lot about this energy security. However, all that it has been doing is getting rid of its opponents, as such steps lead only to higher prices for energy and the complications with the energy supplies. Thank you. And our second questions. The membership of Finland in NATO provides the alliance with the control over both shores of the Gulf of Finland and creates a direct threat to the Russian bases in Severomorsk. How it can influence the prospects of resuming dialogue with the USA on strategic stability? Ms. Ruud, chargé d'affaires of the USA in Russia, spoke about it. How could you comment on this? Well, I would like to say that I have nothing to add because we touched upon this issue a lot of times and the information is published on our website. So is Izvestia with us? Yes, good afternoon. I congratulate the head of the European diplomacy, Mrs. Borrell, told that Russia hasn't been able to become a nation and urged to mobilize all the resources because, according to his words, Russia is a threat to Europe. This resembles on the Hitler narrative before the Second World War. How could you comment on this? Well, these are the words of a person who represents the symbols of anti-Russian Nazi ideology, and probably this has something to do with his medical problems. I do not have any precise information. I have only the possibility to familiarize myself with horrifying statements made by Borrell and to familiarize myself with these thoughts that reflect his nationalist views. He describes the European Union as the garden and the rest of the world he compares with the jungles, and these wordings cannot be characterized other than a blatant jealousy. We see that the European Union tried to become a geopolitical important actor in a multipolar world, and it did accomplish something. However, unfortunately, the loss of its own sovereignty under the US pressure made it impossible for the European Union to become one of the largest actors in the multipolar world. It wasn't only on the threshold of this, but it was very close to accomplishing this goal. However, it lost everything. As for the label a dangerous neighbor, well, the Western countries have been using for a long time this myth about our country posing an external threat to other countries in order to expand NATO. Well, this politics was planified as as a set of institutions and treaties. The USA didn't recognize, didn't welcome our substantive initiatives. They blocked the ratification of the CFE treaty. They blocked the European Security Treaty. They decided not to discuss the project of the security between Russia and NATO. They even didn't provide us any guarantees that the anti-missile systems would not be directed at our nuclear deterrence forces. They left the bilateral INF treaty. They violated on manifold occasions the Open Sky Treaty. In December 2021, we proposed to have legally binding guarantees of security. However, they rejected our initiatives. This was an attempt to reinforce not only our security, but the security of NATO. However, it failed. And today they are trying to distract the attention of the whole world in the context of the upcoming elections into the Euro Parliament in 2024. As a result, we see a record high inflation, energy deficit, stagnation, economic stagnation, and internal division, instability, and the manifestations of racism within the countries. The crisis in Europe is a result of a short-sighted policy of the heads of the European Union. However, these facts are being ignored and silenced. The European Union is trying to support actively the Kyiv's neo-Nazi regime and imposes unilateral sanctions. And Brussels, with its Euro bureaucrats, and Borrell and Ursula von der Leyen, represent the largest threat for Europe, and not Russia. So is media corporation Kitai with us? Yes, we have one question. The government of Japan decided to transfer to the USA the missiles, the anti-missile systems Patriot. This is the first case when the export of lethal weapons was permitted by Japan. Because before, Tokyo could transfer only technologies, non-lethal arms and technologies and components of weapons. Well, this is a first practical step related to the Patriot complex. What does it say us about? The administration once again confirmed its course on consistent dismantling of the specific provisions of the country's post-war constitutions. And in Japan, this will have tangible negative impact on a global and regional security. It is obvious that Japan is trying to serve primarily the interests of the American ally, and it contradicts to its own principles, and in fact, Japan is losing control over weapons which Washington will now be able to dispose of as it wishes. These munitions will appear in Ukraine eventually, and in this connection we would like to warn you that if Japanese missiles fall into the hands of the Ukrainian Armed Forces, such actions will be regarded as totally hostile to the Russian Federation, and this will lead to the most serious consequences for Japan in the context of bilateral ties. Military supplies to the Kyiv regime, whether direct or indirect, will only prolong its agony and further increase the number of innocent victims of its atrocities. And the Japanese authorities will fully share the responsibility for this. Unfortunately, when it was in 1930s, 1940s, Tokyo is once again pandering to Nazism. And this short-sighted policy once already ended in a national catastrophe for the Japanese people, and its tragic fruits for the countries of Europe and Asia are still fresh in their memories. Thank you very much. Happy New Year. Al-Maidin. Yes, good afternoon. I congratulate you on the upcoming New Year, and I'm glad that you attended the event on the 24th of December. The electoral campaign has been launched, and together with this campaign, the Western media launched the defamation campaign. Do you have any plan to confront this? Well, you know, anti-Russian disinformation campaign launched by the West started long before the elections scheduled for 2024. This started, well, I'm not even sure about the exact date. This was a campaign of different scale. But you mentioned that the Central Electoral Commission has already been trying to confront this. We are raising awareness with our Russian politicians and different public people. We are raising awareness for our compatriots and foreign diplomatic missions. We have been conducting this work on a planified, in a planified manner. We will promote real data. However, life makes changes, and probably we will have to respond to this crisis, but we are ready to do it. We are used to such conditions, and we already have a whole set of instruments that we use to protect ourselves and to preserve our security. Is Голос Отечества here?
Hello, Madam Zakharova. We often hear official sources say that the longer arms are supplied from the US and NATO, the further we will push back the borders of safe territory. How far can we do this? I'm sorry, I don't understand. The more long-range weapons the US and NATO supply, the further we will push back the borders of safe territory. You know, I'm not exactly clear what quotes you're stating there. Let me go back to the statement of the President of the Russian Federation, and that the tasks of the special military operation are clearly stated. Those are related issues, and including the ones that you have raised, are being and will be resolved within the framework of the demilitarization and denazification of the territories still under the control of the Nazi Banderit regime in Kyiv. Those are the questions of tactics and strategy of our military specials, of the Ministry of Defense, and the enforcement departments. And such a statement was made by Mr. Shoigu, which is why I'm saying that those measures are worked out as tactics and strategics by the enforcement departments. Thank you. Second question. Could you tell us what role did the Belveshsky agreements play in the collapse of the USSR? Were they the real reason of the liquidation of the USSR? And if not, in what documents was the collapse of the USSR enshrined? You know, once again, this is not a competence of the Ministry for Foreign Affairs. These are the questions for historians, perhaps to those who were tasked with this issue. And I think that maybe I could consult with lawyers on what literature I could recommend for you on this question. Thank you. And then we have one last question. What is one's attitude to the ideas of some Ukrainian figures to jointly with Russia sue the West for damages? And does such a scenario have the right to exist? Is it possible that we, together with Ukraine, will once again defend our common territory from the aggression of the West? As for the damage and to get about, it will be solved, but this is the question for the future. Right now we have practical measures and tasks by the leadership of our country, and detailed mechanisms and parameters cannot be discussed today. It's way too early. We have repeatedly stated the historical responsibility of the West for everything that is happening. And once again, I will say that these questions will be discussed in the future. But right now we have to finish what was stated, what was motivated, and explained with facts and with proof. Is Verelk with us today? Good afternoon, Madam Zakharova. I would like to wish you a belated happy birthday and wish you all the best for the upcoming new year. And same goes for you, thank you. And since this year there were a lot of tragic news, and instead of a question taking into account the coming new year, what would you wish Armenia and the Armenian people? I, of course, think that addressing the people with wishes and everything, this is the competence of the leadership of that country that we're talking about. Or perhaps such an act is the competence of another state on a higher level. I can only say that unofficially, and once again agree that last year was not an easy year for a lot of countries, for a lot of peoples in the world. It was not easy for Armenia, for its friendly people. We see the attempts of external forces to draw Yerevan into an even more dangerous geopolitical game. We see how the West have no care for the fate of Armenian population. They're using their sentiments, their feelings, their historical memory, their pain and suffering only in their own interests. And taking into account the allied nature of relations, we're ready to assist in every possible way to peace, stability, and prosperity of the Republic. This is really important for us for a number of reasons. This is our shared history. This is interpolation of peoples and cultures. This is the stability of the whole region. These are common challenges that we face, common issues that we tackle, and they're easier to tackle together. And due to the trade economic relations with Russia and other member countries of the Eurasian Economic Union, Armenia's economy is demonstrating impressive growth. And for our part, we're determined for the further realization of all planned projects in the key areas of cooperation. We see good prospects for the normalization of relations between Yerevan and Baku on the basis of trilateral agreements of leaders of Russia, Armenia, and Azerbaijan in 2020-2022. There are also prerequisites for the establishment of relations between Armenia and Turkey, and in general, we are interested in reducing conflicts in South Caucasus and unlocking the region's reach potential, which could be facilitated, among other things, by expanding cooperation with the framework of the 3+3 consultative regional platform. This is just our basic position, and just me personally, I would like to sincerely wish the Armenian people, and since you asked, peace, prosperity in the new year, and, if possible, less issues than they were facing this year. Thank you. Is Tverskaya 13 with us today? Madam Zakharova, from our agency, I would like to wish you and all your colleagues a happy new year. May it bring you happiness, good luck, and may every year be filled with a lot of happy moments. Summarizing the results of the past year, what significant events could you highlight? What has been achieved in the current year? What are the priority plans to be implemented in 2024? Well, I already answered a similar question at the previous briefing from the correspondent of Radio Saga. I can only repeat what I said because over the week I don't think there have been any significant changes to that. But as a result of the foreign policy year and a document, its realization, the expansion of BRICS, the Russia-Africa summit, intangible confrontation and real results against the West, overcoming of sanctions, thanks to internal reorganization, structural reorganization of economics, thanks to our external work, of course. A lot of tangible results in multipolarity. I cannot enumerate them all, but even today's briefing shows that we are present in a lot of integration projects of bilateral and multilateral nature in different parts of the world, which are very effective for the country, for the people, if talking it briefly. And I would like to remind once again that the results of the year will be summarized by the Minister of Foreign Affairs. And I think a lot will be said tomorrow during the live interview to Dmitry Kisilov and Russia 24. But the global summarization of results by Minister Lavrov will be made in January. And we invite you all. I can hear you. And now I can hear you. What would you like to wish to Russians in the new year? Can I just... Traditionally, I finish every briefing with the wishes of good luck, of course, material and spiritual well-being. And here, I would like to wish you love in New Year in all its forms. Family love, love for your friends, love for life, love for the world, the kind of love that has to be felt profoundly for your own well-being and for the well-being of others. This is what I'd like to wish. If we don't have any more questions, then allow me to congratulate you on the upcoming holidays. Every country, every people, these holidays have carry their own traditions. Some are similar, some are different from one nationality to another. I wish everyone to celebrate these holidays beautifully, gracefully, to make the most important wishes for your life, for the whole world. And all of us want the same thing, peace and well-being for the future generations. Well-being for the countries and the peoples who can and should live in peace and harmony with each other. And I wish all of you in the new year to achieve, first of all, of that goal, and of course, all your sacred wishes that you make. Happy New Year and happy upcoming Christmas. Happiness, well-being, and may all your wishes come true. Thank you, and I will see you next year. Thank you.